Welcome back to Martial Arts in Chinese Literature and Films. Here, after Confucianism and Taoism, we're introduced the tradition of legalism, another philosophical school that emerged during the Eastern Zhou period. Legalism, 法家, had a critical role in the Qin unification of China, which established the imperial system that would last over 2,000 years in the Chinese tradition. At the end of this video, we'll also talk about the canonization of Confucianism during the Han Dynasty and the lingering presence of legalism in imperial politics. We have mentioned that despite their differences, Confucianism and Taoism are both deeply idealist philosophies. In contrast, legalism is characterized by a realist attitude that may look surprisingly modern. The most representative legalist classic is Han Fei Zi, written by philosopher Han Fei, who lived during the final years of the Warring States period. The basic spirit of legalist thinking can be expressed by the following passage from the chapter titled Two Handles, 二柄 in Han Fei Zi. The way an enlightened ruler controls his ministers is through the use of two handles, and nothing more. These two handles are punishment and favor. In general, legalists emphasize the development of economic and military power and propose that the king or lord must wield centralized, absolute authority over his subordinates. This centralized authority is codified in terms of law or 法 and enforced through what Han Fei referred to as two handles, punishment and favor. Legalists also promoted strategic thinking based on current realpolitik situations. They thus rejected norms or principles based on classical historical models. The ultimate purpose of legalism is to concentrate maximum power in the hands of the sovereign. In its political theory, this centralized form of power is the premise of social order. Modern scholars have compared legalism to the political theory of Machiavelli from Renaissance Italy. The relentless focus on military power in legalism also reminds us of the case of Sparta in ancient Greece. Finally, the drive to establish the sovereign's absolute power over the populace through essentially coercive means and a rigid social hierarchy certainly verges on totalitarianism or authoritarianism. As we shall see, this is precisely the kind of image legalism left in Chinese history through the brutal process of the Qin unification. We have mentioned that the state of Qin became the strongest state during the final phase of the Warring States period. The rise of Qin had to do with the legalist reform that took place due to the proposal of a minister named Shang Yang during the 4th century BCE. Shang Yang's policies suppressed the power of noble families in Qin, developed agriculture and economy, strengthened and expanded military, and put in place strict laws and regulations. Some of the Qin legal codes are extremely harsh, including various forms of corporeal punishments ranging from death penalty by dismemberment or being cut in half to mutilations such as cutting off one's nose or castration. These legal codes also include various forms of collective punishment, that is, one's family members, neighbors, or fellow soldiers could be punished alongside the convicted. We don't have exact data of the actual implementation of these legal codes, but likely the Qin state's legalist society was highly oppressive. The Qin military power did develop in significant ways in this context. In particular, the Qin army adopted an extremely fatal attacking technology by long-range and short-range arrows. Some of these Qin arrows were unearthed during the modern period, and scholars have found their mechanics to resemble that of modern bullets. In 256 BCE, the state of Qin conquered the eastern Zhou capital Luoyi and destroyed the Zhou royal clan. This event marks the official end of the Eastern Zhou period, even though the Warring States period would continue several more decades before the Qin unification. The name of the king who completed this unification is Yin Zheng. Yin is the surname of the Qin royal house. Yin Zheng ascended the throne when he was only 13 years old. As a teenager, he was initially a puppet ruler, but he steadily concentrated power into his own hands and eliminated opposing forces in powerful regions when he approached adulthood. Once having the state of Qin under his own control, Yin Zheng employed Li Si, a minister proposing legalist policies, as his top advisor at the court. He also read and appreciated the writing of Han Fei. Under the proposal of Li Si, and when he was in his early 20s, Yin Zheng believed that time was ripe for wiping out all the other rivaling states. In 230 BCE, the Qin army invaded the state of Han and soon conquered it. Across about a decade of time, Qin continued its brutal conquests until destroying the last remaining state Qi in 221 BCE, when Yin Zheng was 30 years old. Marking the culmination of the Qin conquests, 221 BCE is a crucial year in Chinese history. In this year, Yin Zheng wiped out all the rivaling powers and established an utterly new political system to govern the unified territories, that is, the imperial system. This system is drastically different from the Zhou dynasty enfeoffment system of feudalism we have introduced earlier. Rather than appointing militarized generals and noblemen to reign territories on behalf of the central court, Yin Zheng redivided the territory of China into provinces and counties, Junxian, and appointed administrators to govern these regions. A crucial change with this new system is that the administrators had no ownership over the governed territory or its populace. Neither did they have any independent military force. Moreover, all administrative positions were appointed by the central court and were not hereditary ones like the lords during the Zhou period. Clearly, this new system was designed to generate the maximum centralization of power, and it will continue to be the dominant political system in Chinese history until the Republican Revolution of 1911. Along with this new political system, Yin Zheng also created a new title to designate his absolute authority, that is, Huangdi, Emperor. Prior to this moment, the dynastic rulers, such as those of the Shang dynasty or the Zhou dynasty, had been referred to as the king or Wang. The term Huangdi came into place as a combination of Huang and Di, which were used in ancient texts to refer to mythical sage kings or gods before dynasties started. As the first to assume this title Huangdi, Yin Zheng came to be known as the first emperor, Shi Huangdi, or the first emperor of Qin, Qin Shi Huang. He is one of the most famous and controversial figures in Chinese history. The Qin unification and its imperial system paved the foundations for what China would become for the next 2,000 years. In order to govern the empire through administrative means, the first emperor unified the road system, the measurement system, as well as the writing system, since numerous character variants came about across the Warring States kingdoms. These infrastructural and cultural policies in support of the imperial system also had deep impacts throughout Chinese history. While building these unification apparatuses, the first emperor ruthlessly cracked down any opposing voices. According to historical records, in 212 and 213 BCE, he burned confiscated books recording writings of the 100 schools of thought from the Warring States period, and even buried alive hundreds of scholars who dared to criticize his rule. Many of these scholars belonged to the Confucian school due to the inherent political activism in Confucianism. These persecutions came to be known as burning of the books and the live burials of the scholars, 焚书坑儒, in Chinese history. In addition to persecuting intellectuals, the first emperor also exhausted the general populace with several large-scale public projects. These projects included the construction of the Great Wall as a defense system. Though now a national symbol, in the traditional period, the Qin Great Wall was often represented as a symbol of the first emperor's tyranny. One popular folk story from the traditional period, for instance, tells how a woman named Meng Jiang traveled thousands of miles to search for her husband working on the construction site of the Great Wall, only to learn that he died a long time ago due to hard labor. According to the story, Meng Jiang wept, and part of the wall crumbled to reveal the bones of her husband. This miraculous ending is indicative of heaven's sympathy for the suffering of the populace under the Qin tyranny. In addition to the construction of the Great Wall, the first emperor invested huge manpower and resources into building both his imperial palace in this world, the Efang Palace, and his dwelling in the other world, that is, his mausoleum. The first emperor believed that the afterlife will be an extension of this life, and thus his burial site must possess all the same imperial features as those he enjoyed in life. Likely, you're already familiar with the image of the terracotta soldiers Bingmayong, or may have seen them in Xi'an, the site of the Qin capital, if you have visited there. These ancient statues are fascinating for their lifelike features and their sheer numbers. So far, 8,000 of these statues have been unearthed. Initially, these statues were painted, making them even more lifelike. Yet these ancient paints decayed quickly once they came into contact with air, resulting in their current clayish look. As impressive as the terracotta soldiers are, they represent only a fraction of the full scale of the first emperor's mausoleum. Supposedly, there are many more of these statues buried underground, and the emperor's tomb was built to resemble the cosmos, with gems hanging on the ceiling and streams of mercury on the ground that resemble the ocean and rivers. Supposedly, 700,000 workers, or perhaps slaves, worked on building this mausoleum. While constructing the Great Wall and the mausoleum, the first emperor also ordered the construction of a lavish imperial palace called the Efang Palace, Efang Gong. This palace was destroyed after the fall of the Qin dynasty, but we may assume that it likewise consumed much manpower and resources given the first emperor's fondness for grand projects. Meanwhile, warfare continued on China's borders as the first emperor built a defense system against the Xiongnu people in the north, while expanding territory in the south. The first emperor also became obsessed with pursuing immortality. He conducted several tours outside the capital in search of elixirs of immortality and to perform praying rituals. Ironically, in 210 BCE, about a decade after the unification, he became seriously ill during one of these tours and died soon afterwards. He was only 50 when he died, supposedly in order to keep his death a secret before returning to the capital. The ministers in his inner circle transported his body in a cart full of stinky seafood in order to cover up the stench. The first emperor's son, whose given name was Hu Hai, inherited the throne. He turned out to be a cruel ruler as well. By this point, consumed by the first emperor's elaborate projects and coerced by harsh laws, the populace was pushed to the brink of rebellion. Eventually, the trigger of these rebellions came from two minor military officers, Chen Sheng and Wu Guang. These officers were leading a troop of about 900 soldiers to transport certain military provisions to the north, yet they got delayed due to heavy rain. According to the Qin laws, the entire troop faced the death penalty due to the delay. Chen Sheng and Wu Guang decided that they would rather die fighting. They killed supervisors from the Qin court and led the soldiers to start a rebellion. Chen Sheng and Wu Guang's rebellion failed a few years later, and both of them died in the process. However, the effect of this rebellion snowballed. Numerous rebellions broke out across the Qin Empire, including surviving forces from the other 6 kingdoms conquered by Qin. Meanwhile, the second emperor of Qin, Hu Hai, died in an internal palace coup in 207 BCE. Ziying, a member of the Qin royal clan, inherited the throne when the empire was quickly collapsing. In 206, the troop led by Xiang Yu, who came from a military family of the kingdom of Chu, entered the Qin capital, burned down the Qin palace, and killed Ziying, the last emperor of Qin. The once formidable Qin dynasty thus came to an end, after merely 15 years following the unification. Meanwhile, although he conquered the Qin capital, Xiang Yu, famously known as the hegemon of Chu, Chu Ba Wang, was facing challenges from another rebel force led by Liu Bang, who named his force Han, since its base was in the Hanzhong area of the Shanxi province. After several years of warfare, Liu Bang's force overcame that of Xiang Yu's. According to a well-known historical account, seeing his inevitable defeat, Xiang Yu refused to escape to the south and committed suicide as a gesture to honor his fallen soldiers. After defeating Xiang Yu, Liu Bang established the Han Dynasty in 202 BCE. He abolished the harsh laws of the Qin dynasty and adopted a laissez-faire policy to rest the populace and develop economy. This laissez-faire policy indicates a Taoist orientation which continued through the founding phase of the Han Dynasty. After about 70 years, when the throne was passed to Liu Che in 141 BCE, later known as the Emperor Wu of Han, Han Wudi, the Han Dynasty had maintained overall peace and achieved economic prosperity. Emperor Wu of Han ascended the throne when he was 16, and his rule lasted 53 years, one of the longest in Chinese history. He also became one of the most famous emperors in Chinese history. Externally, he expanded Chinese influences to the west towards Central Asia. Internally, he promoted Confucianism as the state philosophy, creating a legacy that would influence Chinese culture in fundamental ways. Emperor Wu of Han's endorsement of Confucianism was due to the proposal of a courtier named Dong Zhongshu in 134 BCE. During the time, Han courtiers had different intellectual affinities and political alliances. In order to unify thought and consolidate his power, Emperor Wu decided to support the Confucian scholars represented by Dong Zhongshu. Through his endorsement, Emperor Wu emphasized in particular the ritual hierarchy in Confucianism, especially the minister's absolute loyalty to the sovereign. Whereas Qin legalism enforced this loyalty through coercive means, Emperor Wu found it important to cement it through education and culture. Therefore, he established the Imperial Academy or Taixue to train courtiers to study Confucian classics. This Imperial Academy has been considered as the origin of the university system in China, and the exams conducted at the academy became the prototype of the civil exams that become the primary means to recruit officials in later periods. Confucianism's emphasis on virtue and humaneness also appeared to be the right antidote to a tyrannical, harshly legalist government as exemplified by the Qin dynasty. In a famous essay entitled Faults of Qin, 过秦论, written during the early Han dynasty, a scholar named Jia Yi thus argues, maintaining power is different from seizing power. Humaneness and integrity are crucial to the maintenance of power, yet they were neglected by the Qin dynasty. 仁义不施而攻守之势异也. This theory also rendered Confucianism appealing to Emperor Wu and later Han dynasty rulers. And indeed, despite periods of instability, the Han dynasty lasted about 400 years until 220 CE. Nevertheless, the centralized legalism at the founding of the imperial system never disappeared in actual imperial politics, despite the apparent endorsement of Confucianism. Modern scholars sometimes characterize this feature of the traditional imperial system as Confucianism on the outside, legalism on the inside, 外儒内法. That is, ideological unification and rationalization through Confucian theory, and absolute monarchy in actual political operations. In this setup, from a cynical perspective, Confucian principles in imperial politics could be merely hypocritical. Nevertheless, due to the emphasis on moral cultivation and integrity in Confucian teachings, from time to time we would witness cases in which scholars or ministers took these values to heart and dared to stand up to coercive powers, including those coming from the emperor himself. Even when these scholars pay a terrible price for their opposition to power, they could be celebrated as cultural heroes in historical memory. In our next lecture, as a preface to the film Hero, we'll look at the famous clash between one such scholar and Emperor Wu of Han. Though he endorsed Confucianism, Emperor Wu was at moments as tyrannical as the first emperor of Qin. The scholar who dared to oppose him was Sima Qian, who is now remembered as China's grand historian due to his magnum opus Historical Records, 史记, a massive book of the entire known history up to Sima Qian's time. Sima Qian experienced terrible persecution at the hands of Emperor Wu. In fact, he suffered the horrible punishment of castration due to his dissent from the emperor's opinions. Likely, Sima Qian channeled his critical vision of imperial politics and the elite class into his history book. In line with this critical vision, he wrote some of the most memorable biographies from the book to immortalize heroism or extraordinary deeds within the commoner class, including those who dare to assassinate noblemen and the first emperor himself. The film hero is loosely based on the assassin narratives from Sima Qian's history book, although the film further raises complex questions regarding the modern implications of these traditional stories. We will turn to these topics in the next lecture. Next week, you'll also be viewing the film Hero itself, in which you'll see the convergence of the many themes we have introduced so far.